Joy Harjo, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. When I first knew that David Zwirner had found these Hilma af Klint drawings, and we were thinking about who would be interesting to engage to talk about them, I thought of you. And I'm just like actually a little fangirled out that you're here and really just incredibly excited to talk about these extraordinary drawings by Hilma af Klint from 1913 to 1915, this suite of 7 drawings. And I know that when I approached you, you looked up the work and you had a kind of immediate response to it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I've been so busy with this poet laureate stuff that my schedule, I've been saying, no, we can't do anything else. When I looked at the work, I thought, oh my God, I get it. Her work is, she's so intuitive, so smart, so very grounded in the natural world, at the same time, just way ahead, where she was seeing way ahead of her time. It's not an easy place to be. Very brave, I think. There was incredible bravery, and then the art is just amazing.
When you say the word foreseeing, I've never heard that word before. What does that mean for you, and how do you see it in relation to other forms of seeing?
I think that it's something all artists do, whether they say they're empirical, an empirical artist. I don't usually hear artists say that, but it's a way of all artists. I mean, you go into the story field or the image field, or we go where we haven't seen before or we haven't heard before, even though we're using the materials of our times, of history, of myth, of place, of plants, of belief systems. We're still going in to find something that we don't know and put it together in a way that might have deep grounding in our belief systems, but at the same time, something is coming through us that is needed, like for nourishment for those who are coming behind us. I think art works in that way. If you looking at her work now,
right?
It's and she acknowledges that, about going into these places and sometimes even being told. All artists talk about that. Whether you come right out and say, "Well, I'm mediumistic or clairvoyant," or you don't say it, that's essentially what we're doing. Is we listen. I mean, you hear fiction writers all the time say, "Well, my characters wouldn't do what I wanted them to do."
Right.
Or an artist, you're trying to work at something and it's not, that, how do you know? That's the question I always ask. How do you know? But when it's going in the right direction, and it may take you someplace that you didn't expect. And yet you may have a larger theme to explore, like with Hilma af Klint, this whole idea of, she was deeply sensual in her work. You can see all she was an incredible landscape artist, that sensibility and that sensuality. It is like you see that duality, you see that utter earthliness along with this. It's threaded with sky knowledge. It's kind of threaded with sky knowledge at the same time. And it certainly was realistic and representative. And then she moves into this more symbolic realm, but that never leaves her. I think in all of these pieces, they're all grounded by plant knowledge.
Oh, I love that. First off, I love the phrase sky knowledge, because that is just so evocative of, she talked about Hilma af Klint talked about wanting to operate on different planes, the astral plane, the human plane, and the underground plane. So the idea that there's sky knowledge that is rooted to those other planes is really beautiful. And I wonder also if we could talk about what she's seeing, because she does make these beautifully rendered, very delicately observed landscapes or her naturalist drawings of flowers in which she seems like she's reporting back from the field. And here too, I feel like she's reporting back from the field, from what she's seen or been allowed to see, or that she's projecting into a vision. And I like that you see it as plant knowledge. And I wonder, just in this drawing, if you could even, well, I guess I wonder two things. One, could you tell me how you would describe this drawing to another person?
Okay. Yeah, so what I see here at the beginning, I mean, it's divided. She deals constantly with duality. She wrestled with it. I would guess that she wrestled with it constantly in her own life. We all wrestle with something. We're all obsessed with something as artists or any human being. But here's the duality. This is the earth. This is the sky. And this is plant, like the genus. This is what I see as like a seed germinating. It's in the earth. And so that's a seed germinating, but it's all kinds of possibility. And for the creation of any life, you need dual kind of powers coming together. And here it is going up into this other, well, sky knowledge, but it comes up, this could be considered the spine. She was very versed in theosophy, which was much of theosophy found its rootings in Vedic knowledge.
Right.
And so I see this as kind of the spine. It's also the tree of life. The tree of life is also the spine, and it goes up into these different realms of knowledge. But there's always the duality. There's the male, female, and she talks about how the angel, and there's the angel, and that's kind of the overseer or the knowledge that is beyond, the knowledge in a way guiding all of this, but is beyond. But even the upper realm looks like a beautiful outcome of a plant.
Mm-hmm.
You see the green, and it's even up here, it looks almost like the navel cord of a
Beautiful.
navel cord, of a plant, but it can be the navel cord of an idea, or the navel cord of life coming about, whether it's the life of a child or the life of a love that happens between when two people come together, or, the life of a plant. And so, I love this one. It's such an affirmation, and it's, again, you see constantly in her work this duality, which can be in opposition. They're not peacefully sitting there, these birds. They're not, they're fighting, but that's how she saw the energy. It's like, well, any energy is going to, they feed off each other. So sometimes one carries it more, sometimes another, and it's this back and forth, much like the kind of, I sense in her work that kind of, she had trouble making peace with it. And then you think about being a woman artist, in those times, even now, even though things have somewhat changed, there was that duality. And I think it's interesting that this set was something that she gave to Rudolf Steiner, who, I think that that's interesting, because I think that she had quite a struggle with him.
Yes.
And she had quite a struggle with him, with that, the male-female.
Right. She wants something from Steiner, clearly, that she can't get. One of the things that I find so incredible about this drawing and this suite of drawings, and you're right, you're pointing to this duality, but I feel like in Western culture, every time we set up a duality, what we get wrong is not the duality, but we immediately put a hierarchy on the duality. Male is stronger than female, white is better than black, all these things that are so twisted. But here, this duality's, there's no hierarchy. Like, even if you're describing the earth part of the drawing and the sky part of the drawing, they're given equal weight in the drawing, and there's this connective tissue between them. They've literally, almost like a circulatory system developed between them. And I find that tension really gorgeous, that like you can have all this sort of sensual sexuality in the drawings, but they're not asked to behave in like normative, ways that we think about when we think about a dualism.
Yes, I love that, what you said about that circulatory system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting too, because she was very Christian,
Right.
but at the same time, she also went looking. I think she went looking like to theosophy, spiritualism, and so on, to maybe because they verified what she was already seeing.
Right.
Because seeing, they say, well, humans see within a certain spectrum. Well, it depends culturally. You can see outside that spectrum. That's why you have paintings of auras around saint figures or Mary sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's that we all carry light. All of us carry light. And some people, I think she could see it.
Right.
It's obvious in her art, in her paintings, that she could see it. And there is movement. And what I love is, this kind of goes against the Christian thing, which is very hierarchical, which puts male above woman, mm-hmm. which puts a kind of, not even the sky realm, but a sense of a hierarchy that's ruled by a white male patriarchal God,
right,
who has dominion and owns everything. And this says, no, there's a larger sense, there's a larger communication. Maybe that's what it is, communication going on. And the communication goes on in color. I mean, the color to me is very Swedish.
Yes. Yes, she is Swedish. The color is Swedish. And also she's someone, that north light. And then, of course, in terms of duality, right, much of the year is dark. And then much of the year is light. You have that real shift between winter and summer in Scandinavia is a very profound shift in terms of light.
Yes, I've been to those northern countries.
Yeah, I have too.
Yes.
I love that light.
Yes, and the winter is long.
Yes, and hard and dark. Yeah, you have to be comfortable with yourself in the dark in those places. I wonder if... there's a lot of talk about Helma that she was mediumistic, she was clairvoyant. These are words that have already come up. Certainly by, she's working with a group of women called the Five, and by 1906, 1907, she understands herself to be receiving messages, that these drawings are sort of coming through her. And I wonder how you respond to that kind of description of her work and her process. And I ask you because, I'm trained in a very Western European art historical tradition, and talk of spirituality and mediums and clairvoyancy is verboten. These are things that make the Anglo-European academic brain very nervous. And they don't make you nervous. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the why of that, and how you see her as an artist in this mediumistic tradition.
I think it's whether the Western art tradition wants to speak about it or the empirical scientific communities want to speak about it, any new invention or way of thinking about math or way of thinking about how the universe is constructed comes about through this knowledge that they don't know coming through. Yes, you can study. Well, she studied. She studied painting. She studied form. She studied line. She has the study there. But where do these things come from? You could ask, where does it come from? It's not just your mind. I mean, it's the science is catching up with other belief systems of which, the mind is a kind of field. The mind,
right?
The mind is a kind of field. Clairvoyance, everybody has, everybody sees what they can't see. I mean, we think, we invent things appear. Tomorrow appears, this moment appears. So I don't think it's quite so strange, but it's what belief systems do. If a hierarchical white male God wants everyone to be in obedience to a particular economic system or a system of control, well, of course, we don't want anyone to have self-knowledge, have self-knowledge, and yet when we sit with ourselves and with, the universe is immense. There is more knowledge in the intuitive realm than in all of the libraries of the world, because they're all in that intuitive field.
Right. There's something that you write about in Crazy Brave, which is your beautiful memoir. You write about something called the knowing, and that dreams are a form of knowledge. And it was partly why when I saw these drawings, I knew I wanted to talk to you, because I wondered if they were a form of the knowing for you. Am I right? Am I wrong? Can you talk a little bit about the knowing and how that works for you and how it might be working for Hilma af Klint?
Yes, I think it works for every artist, whether they call it that. People call it inspiration. There's the muses, everyone, the muses. For years, people have tried to give it some kind of name. What is this that makes anyone want to be an artist? I mean, tell me about it. Who is going to be a poet? There's no poet at Career Day. Maybe art, we can see evidence here of art, but, artists are kind of intermediaries. And we're intermediaries between, every society has intermediaries that go between. It's sort of a liminal kind of space to see what's there and to use the materials and create. I don't really know how totally to explain it. But that's why I say she was brave, because she had obviously, she was taken care of enough so that she could make this kind of art. She wasn't on the street, nor did she have to make art to satisfy a sponsor.
Right.
So she had at least some freedom to be able to do what she was seeing, even though there wasn't art being made in her circle like what she saw. That's an artist.
Right.
Almost any artist it will come down to that. They are making something that is bringing new life, like this heart in the middle in the circulatory system. We have a spiritual circulatory system going on right now. And people catch hold onto it. I think an artist can catch hold onto it and write it, but it doesn't come automatically. There's all of these every one of these drawings is a part, becomes something in here. In a way, you've got an image over here with a apple cut. And the beautiful, I don't know if you've ever cut an apple in certain ways and looked at the stars it makes. Well, here's an apple, and then here's a pear.
Right.
And then there's these chalice or cup figures, which are directly out of Christianity. And, how she, again, there's it mirrors the kind of duality that she has going on. But every one of these are ways that she's exploring. Okay, what is this that's come to me? Just like a mathematician with using empirical data. Line can be empirical data.
Right.
Paint can be empirical data. There's certain qualities and properties, even to graphite, to the hardness or the softness of it, that's still materials. But yet it has been made, I think, in this culture, like this very Western culture, to be suspect, or they would burn people for recognizing or for following or listening to the plants.
Right.
Which give knowledge.
Right.
So that's how I feel. The knowing is really just that kind of is that same kind of data coming in that tells you this is the direction you need to go, or you're working. You work on the craft of it, but there's at some point, it's like I was working on my memoir, Poet Warrior, that's just out, And I came to a line. I was writing about a horrible stepfather and talking with a stepsister after he passed, trying to understand. And then the line comes, even the monster has a story. I mean, I sat there for a while after writing that and thought, where does that come from? But there's been a lot of reading, thought, other poetry, art that goes into all of that.
Right.
Because we're like transformers. That's how I see her art. It's like a piece of art, a poem could be a transformer station. And very potent and powerful pieces become transformer stations that can shift a whole culture. I mean, yeah, you can think of all kinds of pieces of art that do that.
Right.
And in a way, she was doing this, but she was doing it in such a place of relative solitude, which is interesting to me.
Well, you said so many things that are interesting. One, of course, you said she was supported, right? So she's taken care of. So she has in a way, the freedom, the privilege to be in touch with this part of herself. And of course, she doesn't marry. She doesn't marry a man. She lives in a circle of women. So she's freed from the societal conventions of her period, in which a married, European woman would have to take care of the man. So she's freed of that. And the other thing you keep doing, which I am finding very enlivening in my brain, is you're able to hold this mediumistic clairvoyancy, the knowing on one hand, with the specificity of her training on the other. You keep saying, like, there's line, there's the material, this watercolor that she's using. It's grabbing the paper in certain ways and giving her this modeled variegation of color that's quite delicate and intimate. And you've talked about her training as an artist. And I know in conversations with friends and other art historians that part of how people get nervous when we start talking about clairvoyancy or mediums is they say, oh, well, then you make it like she's not an artist, that she hasn't worked to develop this incredible skill set. And you're saying, like, oh, no, these two things, that she might in fact be capable of hearing or seeing this other form of knowledge, in part because she has this very highly developed set of pictorial mark-making skills. Like, this is a woman who knows how to make a picture, like you are a woman who knows how to make a poem. And that these two things are not oppositional, but in fact that the one is almost like the conduit for the other. And I guess the other thing I want to ask you is, when I look at these, I feel very overwhelmed by this feeling of Gaia, of that one of the things that I think I understand about this earth that we're on, this blue marble that we're on all together, is that we are all this separation between us is just like a convenient fiction that lets us keep talking to each other, but that actually the continuity between us is so much more profound than the division. And I almost feel like that's what these are pictures of, in a way. They're pictures of how it, quote unquote, really is, or like really works. And I'm curious if that has any resonance with you.
It does, because as you were saying that, I was thinking about how this is where the creative happens. Between that here and there.
Right.
And then there was something else, and I probably lost it, about there's a cultural thing too. That's another thing I wanted to bring up, where in at least my experience of many of my own tribal culture and others, is that we don't separate that out. That often the healers, I've noticed this with Mexican-American Native artists I do, and a lot of Native artists that I know are also healers. Or they also, because those realms are even, I know that the singers, there's a word for a healer, a particular healer in the Dene culture, the Hatafli, which is singer. The singers, you sing, and you're bringing energy up, and bringing energy up through here, singing and making, it goes out and is making an effect in the world, just like a painting. This has gone out and it's like, here we are. How many years later? It was these,
Right. These are 1913 to 15.
Right, and here it is. It has an absolute place in here.
Right.
And it's setting off creative discussion, interaction, and here she is. I mean,
I know, and it feels so timeless and also so utterly like what we need right now.
Yes.
There's another thing you say in your poem, Let There Be No Regrets. There's a question in the poem, and it says, "What do you see when you fly to the top of the ancestor tree?"
Okay.
And when I was reading that, I immediately thought of these drawings, and I wanted to ask you, it's like my second to last question to ask you is like, what is the vantage point? Like, if these are a kind of map, if they're a kind of cartography,
Yeah.
what is the vantage point from which you think she is seeing? Like where is she placed?
Well, you think about dreaming and a spirituality, which is imagination also. It's active and it's a certain kind, is you can see from there. You can put yourself there. You can fly there. I mean, I bet you've flown in your dreams. People fly. Yes. And what do you see? And seeing from the top of the ancestor tree gives you a vantage point. And in that vantage point, it's like what happened when the NASA image of the Earth was released. Suddenly we were talking about global and ecological and so on, because we saw that we are this being, we are one.
Right.
But what makes up that one is all of these dualisms, people coming together, diversity.
Right.
Difference.
Right.
And it makes, as she's showing here, it makes a whole.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, sometimes, we don't agree, there's opposition, but, and that's what she's constantly dealing with in all of her work, what happens with the opposition?
Right.
But you get into a place, if you keep shifting context, like from being 2 years old to 7 to 14 to 70 and so on, the context gets larger and it shifts. And then you can keep shifting into agelessness.
Which actually something I love about a lot of your poems is that it seems to me the subjectivity in a lot of your poems is that we have all the ages in us all the time. That we're, that there's this, you talk about time folding on itself.
Yeah.
And I love that quality of your poetry, and I see it in these drawings as well. I feel like I would be remiss, you are our nation's poet laureate, and it would be remiss of me not to ask you if you would read something, a poem that you've written that you feel might have some relation both to the drawings and to our conversation today. And I wonder if you would feel up for that.
I can do that. You know what I wanted to do is to write a poem for this, but that didn't happen. I had another deadline.
Something to look forward to. That's something to look forward to.
But this is a new poem that just came out called Without. And again, it's dealing with the dualities. The dualities of these times, these very divisive times we find ourselves in. Of course, you can call the times she was in divisive too.
Right.
Maybe that's
right.
Human beings trying to work things out here in this plane.
Right.
So this is called Without. Okay. The world will keep trudging through time without us when we lift from the story contest to fly home. We will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters and the other half is nailing it all back together through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' trysts, and endless human industry. Maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadow of earth's sorrows, watch hyenas drink rain, and laugh.
Oh, joy. Joy, the person, and joy as in joy. Thank you so much. That was that's the perfect way to end. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've been so excited about this. So thank you.
Me too. Thank you.